Kumlan and Abla Gemara. Today's daf is daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph. This is Monday. And in the Mishnah we learned that whether it was done deliberately or whether it was done shayik, Einis, Beratzen, doesn't matter when it comes to Yibum, they are all kaina. We also learned in the Mishnah that whether you initiate, the penetration or whether it's it's consummated, it is kaina. So the Gemara says now, when we say kaina, what does it mean? According to Taisus, we're actually only focusing on the weak biyas like shegeg or mazid for lust or ainis and so on. And according to Rashi, it would seem that it applies also to the case of Mara. Now, according to Taisus, initial penetration of a question, it's kind of completely. There's no difference, Mara or Kamar Bia. The question is only about all the other cases. Rashi seems, at least in the beginning, seems to be saying here that it's also a question about Mara. When we say kind of, how far is the kinyan? Later on, Rashi only mentions the other weak bias and doesn't mention Mara, so it seems that maybe Rashi also would agree with Taisus that Mara is definitely a full-fledged kinyan. Now the question is, all these other bias, which is a bit weaker than normal, when you say that he is kaina, what respect is he kaina? My kaina, what do you mean is kaina? Like the din of Yevamos by Yevamos. What do you mean you kaina? Rav says, we're only talking, this only applies to Yevamos. Rav says, kaina l'kol. In every respect, it's your wife. Shmuel Amar like kaina, you're not kaina only l'dvaram or parsha, only those things noted in the parsha, which is two things later. But now, as a result of that, he inherits his deceased brother, and number two, l'paitam and ayibum. And the second thing is that now that he marries her, so therefore, if he now dies, and he happens to have children from another wife, so therefore she doesn't need Yevamos from as his account. She doesn't still need to finish up or tie up any loose ends from the first husband's account. It's over. She's now a free woman. She can go out in the marketplace. And so too, there was a tzara. She is free. If he marries her and there's a co-wife, she is totally free. In those respects, it's totally his wife. So now the Gemara explains, and we'll soon see which one is not his wife. For example, if there's a kohen, can she eat truma? Says Gemara as follows: Min hanasuyin, if let's say that she was married to Reuven, and Reuven was a kohen, and so she was eating truma because she was married to a kohen. And now that Reuven died, her brother, his brother, which is also a kohen, and the question is whether he can eat truma already now using one of these weak beers. Is like everyone achla, she can continue eating. Since she was eating by Reuven, and now Shimon's taking over, even though did a weak kinyan, she can continue. She can resume. She never ate by Reuven because she was only engaged. Now, from the Torah's perspective, as soon as you're engaged, you can already eat truma. It's only the Rabbanon that say that you cannot eat truma. The Gemara has a machlekes. Why can't you eat truma? We have another place in Shas. It's either because of simpan or because we're chayshed that she will give it to her family. In other words, as long as she's engaged in the marriage, she's still with her original family who are Yisraelim. And we're scared that she might pass the truma onto them. The other reason is because of simpan. What happens if they get married? He finds out that she has a movement, therefore, retrospectively, the entire marriage is unraveled. So she never was married to him, and she or engaged him even holding a mekach tos, and she was eating truma. She had no right. So it's only midrabban. So we say, nevertheless, if, however, she was a Reuven midrabban, she couldn't eat truma. That's the machlekes whether now Shimon comes in, can she eat truma right now or not? When she only had one of these weaker bias, she eats. Why? The Rabbi Rachmana bias shegi kemezi. The Torah says, I don't care what kind of bias he does when it comes. We had Yevamos Yavala in all instances, and therefore he takes her. She now becomes his full-fledged wife. And Shmuel Amar ki Rabbi Rachmana, when the Torah says that these instances she's still she's acquired by her brother-in-law is only to be equal to the husband, or to be strong in the husband. She did not eat truma when she was married to Reuven. So now you're saying when she comes to the Shimon that she should be able to eat truma. For sure not. No. If she was married to Reuven, of course she can go ahead. And if he married her properly, then again she can eat truma. We're talking about he did a weak bia. As a weak bia, he shouldn't be any stronger than what it was originally by Reuven. And why? Because Shmuel is very consistent with his view. The Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Rav Nachman Shmuel, Kol Shabal Meichel, Yavam Meichel. Whatever the first original husband was able to feed, so too can the brother-in-law. The Chol She'ela Bal Meichel. But if the husband couldn't, for example, if he was only engaged, then Yavam Meina Meichel, nor can he. Says he want to make have a question. It says in the Braisa the following: Bas Yisrael Pakachas, a Jewish girl who was very intelligent. Shenis Arsel Pikech. She got engaged to an intelligent guy, so the Kedushin was Mahatoida. And then what happened was they weren't able to conclude this the second phase of marriage ad Shenis Chadish until unfortunately he became deaf and dumb. And now Mahatoida, he can no longer marry her. He can no longer marry her. So the question is, so as we say as follows: Eina Eichele, she cannot eat truma. She cannot eat truma because they cannot conclude the marriage. So she's only engaged, but an engaged woman cannot eat truma. What about mace? What about if he died? Now she fell before her brother-in-law, and it happens to be that the brother-in-law also is a chedesh, and the brother's also chedesh. She can actually eat, because when it comes to the brother-in-law, we don't really need full das. We said before, so therefore, the brother-in-law can marry her. Now the brother-in-law married her, even though it was a weak beer, she can eat truma. And it says in the Braisa, here we have an example where the brother-in-law is stronger than the original husband. This is exactly like Rav, contrary to Shmuel. Where he said clearly that the brother-in-law, even though she was engaged to the Truma, now married the brother-in-law, she could, fine. So the brother-in-law is stronger. Shmuel, Kasha, Shmuel said there's a few words missing, and I'm going to redact the Braisa as follows. Say the following. This is how you read the Braisa. He didn't get married until he became deaf and mute. She did not need Truma. Now we're adding these words. What about konas? What about he married her, the original husband? So when he married her, she was eating truma, and then afterwards he became deaf and dumb. She continues eating while she's married to him. Mace, if he dies, the nofla lifnei yavam, and now she fell before her brother was a chedesh. She continues eating because she was already eating by the original brother, so she can eat by the second one, by the brother-in-law. So what does the Braisa mean that the brother-in-law is stronger? How's the brother-in-law stronger? My bazu, the ilu bal chedesh mikara loyacheles, the original husband, if he would have been originally deaf and dumb, that means his marriage was never really a proper marriage. She would not be able to do truma. But the brother-in-law, we don't care when he became a chedesh. He became a chedesh now or in the beginning. If he's only a brother-in-law, even though it's a weak bia, she can eat truma. So that's one version. Another version as follows: if they were merely engaged, did not eat truma. If she never ate truma, then she cannot eat with the brother-in-law. It means even Rab will agree she cannot eat by the brother-in-law because she didn't eat originally, and it's a weak bia. The law of Chaybal, she didn't eat husband only if the brother-in-law marries her properly, then she can eat if he's a kain. But if it's a brother-in-law did not marry properly but did one of the other methods, she cannot eat because she didn't eat before either. The argument is she was married to Reuven, so therefore she was eating truma, and now the brother-in-law made a kind of a beer. It says she can continue eating. Why do I have she with first husband? Shmuel Amar, even though she was eating for her husband, this weak beer does not entitle her to eat. Why not? Ki Rabbi Rachmana beer. So you amazed when the Torah said that it's a valid ordinary woman. If you do these kind of beers, it wouldn't be valid. Only for Yevama, and even in Yevama, it's only insofar the following didn't. One of them wouldn't pasha. It's other things now. Says the Gemara of Nachman Shmuel, didn't we say before that Kol? He said a rule: Kol Shabbal Michael, the original husband gave it to eat. Yevam Michael brother gave it to eat. So if she ate by Reuben, why can't she eat by Shimon? Amo will translate Kol Bia Shahabal Maichba, any valid bia. In other words, if Reuben would have done a valid bia and feeds her, then Yavam, he would have done the same kind of bia Maichba. In other words, if Shimon, the brother-in-law, would have married her properly, yes, she would eat truma. But if the original husband would have done one of these beers, she never would have been married to him, so she wouldn't even eat truma. So if the brother-in-law as well does one of these weak beers, she cannot eat truma. It doesn't matter that she was married to Reuben and she ate truma. Ain't no Yavam Maichba. Meis will ask the same question from the Braisa we had before, and now it's a question of both Rav and Shmuel, because everyone agrees that she was only engaged to Reuben. She cannot eat by Shimon, and the Braisa clearly said that Shimon is more powerful than Reuben. Bas Yisrael said the Braisa, you Jewish girl, Pikachas intelligence, also going to be that was engaged to a kohen that was intelligent, and he speak the kohen in his but it didn't consummate. It didn't go to the next stage until he became deaf and dumb, and therefore Matei they're not married. in the chel she cannot eat truma. Mace, and the way we read the original brayse is, and if Reuven died, we're not from the Yevamos and Chedesh, and now she's going to be married to a brother-in-law who's definitely dumb. Chel she could eat. So Reuven couldn't feed her, and Shimon can, because Reuven couldn't consummate the marriage. He was only a Chedesh. But Shimon is a Chedesh, doesn't matter. And here we see the brother-in-law is stronger than the husband. So Rav will have to answer and edit the brayse the way we answered in the first way is that we have to add one more line. And if Reuben was healthy and they got married, they're married, and afterwards he became a Chedesh, he can continue eating, and then if he dies, then Shimon can take over. So Shimon is no better than Reuben. Fine, because they're both feeding her and they're both giving her truma. You're right. Kashi, we have a problem with Shmuel. How is he going to learn shot in the brayse? Then the Gemara continues. We learned in another brayse, Bas Yisrael Pikachas. An Yiddish girl, she is Arsel the Kohen, they got engaged to a Kohen Pikayach. They didn't finalize the marriage until he became deaf dumb. They don't eat. She cannot eat, obviously, because she's not fully married. She's only engaged, and the Rabban don't want to eat. What about Noiled Leben? If she had a son, that this son is a Kohen, then on account of the son, she's entitled to eat. She can eat because of the son. Sounds like from here that everyone agrees. But she can eat because of the son. What about Mesa Ben? Eventually, the son, let's say, passed away, predeceased her husband. Here, Rav says, as we'll soon see, according to Rabbah, but because she was already eating with the son's alive, she can continue eating when the son is dead because she's married to a Kohen. She was engaged to a Kohen, and even though now the husband never really finalized the marriage before he became Chedesh, but nevertheless, because she started eating with the son, let her continue. The Chachamim, this is where Rabbah learns. Chachamim say, "Ein echel, you cannot continue eating." So what's going on? In my time, that I'm not Rabbah. She was eating till now, let her continue. According to Chachamim, her husband can, her son is dead, so they can. The son cannot entitled to eat, and the husband is a Chedesh. Never finalized the marriage, cannot entitled to eat. I said, what's the cheshbon? Because once upon a time she can continue. The age she continue. So a question. I'm not going to you. Bas Yisrael, she's a Kohen. For Yiddish girl, Bas Yisrael was married to a Kohen. She can eat truma while they're married, mace, and then the husband dies. The thing is that she can no longer eat truma. According to you, yes, because once you start, let it finish. What do you have to say? Because the husband died, because the husband died. So in the case of a Kohen married to a Yisrael, because the husband died, she's no longer any kedusha. She has zero kedusha. How can she eat truma? Is Hachanami here too? She's not eating because of her husband, the Chedesh, because they're not married. No, but because of the son. Kivan the Misla, the son died. Why should she continue eating? Because the husband never could finalize the marriage, only because of the son, but he's dead. Elo Rabbi Yosef. So that was Rabbi and Abaye, who was a student of Rabbi Yosef, that always gave them a hard time. He challenged Rabbi. So Rabbi Yosef stepped in. So I'll give you an answer. But as you know, Abaye takes nothing just like that without challenging. Elo Rabbi Yosef. So Rabbi Nosson holds the Suye Chedesh Machilim B'Truma. He Nosson holds that the main reason why we don't let an Arusa eat is because she's sitting at home with her family, and she'll give them the truma. And because that's the main reason, it seems that's how Rashi learned it, that's the main reason. And therefore, once she's married to the Chedesh, that reason doesn't apply. Since Matera, she's entitled to truma once you're engaged. Only the Rabbanan stopped to prevent it because we're scared it'll pass down to her family. But if she's living with the Chedesh in his house, she's not with her family, so she won't pass it on. That's why she's allowed to eat truma. So the Chedesh machim truma, but like I said, I'm worried Chedesh out to kedusha Chedesh. Not worried if we allow her to eat, and next time she's only engaged to Chedesh, she'll also eat truma. But I'm worried about it. Tate already asked, what about the other reason? Because it's simple, maybe it'll unravel the whole thing. So Tate said, because now that he's a Chedesh, he won't be looking at, he won't notice these things, which is very difficult to understand. Because, when we say a Chedesh from the beginning of time, it's not intelligent enough, I guess, to do what it has to do. But if this person was a Pikech all the time, and he became a Chedesh only later on in life, he would be intelligent enough to realize whether there's a symptom, whether there was mumim, whether there's any defects there or not, even though he's now a Chedesh. Doesn't lose all his intelligence. He already acquired all his intelligence before. What's Pshat and Tesis that now that he became Chedesh, he's no longer capable of checking out if she has any defects. And maybe that's why Rashi doesn't bring that reason at all and just follows the other reason that we don't give a truma because we're worried that to pass on to her family. Anyway, Abaye challenges Rabba challenges Rabbi Yosef. Abaye said, so what about Noilid Laban's? According to this story here, now that she moved into her husband's house, even though they didn't finalize the marriage because of Chedesh, nevertheless, she can continue eating Truma. So what's the relevance of having a son, not having a son? Even if she has no son, she can continue eating. Is Im Kain, Noilid Laban, we would have to say that she had a son. It's irrelevant she had a son, didn't have a son. Even if she has no son, she's able to eat Truma because she's living in her husband's house. Says, you're right. You know why we mentioned about a son? Mishum Rabbanon. We want to say that if Rabbanon can see to Rab Nosson, if she had a son, she can eat while she has a son. But if she has no son, the Rabbanon say that she cannot eat. And Rab Nosson would hold, however, in both cases, she can eat. Whether she has a son and whether she has no son, she can eat. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, let Rab Nosson argue from the beginning. As soon as you mentioned, if the first case had a child, I'm not should right away say, you should argue from the beginning, and then say that you don't need that you can eat truma straight away. When it says there that as soon as if her husband became a chayed before they got married, ain't no the mother should say that Nosson says, however, she could eat because she's living in her husband's house. Why only introduce Rav Nosson Chamim when he talked about the Lebed? Says the Gemara. Belief like I'm not so liberacious. Moshe said, "Boy, you know what? Shavu with Rabbanon at the same Messiah. They wanted to wait until Rabbanon finished concluding the opinion of Rabbanon before we introduce Rabbanon." Says the Gemara, it doesn't make sense because the Hachiv saw the listening may have been ein lechel. This first state the opinion of Chachamim. So say the following: say that Chachamim say that if there was no child, she can no longer eat, and Rab Nosson says you could eat, but then say, and if there was a child, then they both hold you couldn't eat. The way you have it right now is you interrupt it, you bring them and they go back to the Chachamim. Kasha, that is problematic. Okay, so then the Gemara continues. It says in the Mishnah, anyone who has a relationship with any of the arroyas, incest, and so on. So we say that word haroy is chayim and so on. So Omar Rab Amram. Rab Amram said, "Hamilsa Omar Lalav Sheish." The following thing was said, and the Mishnah says over there that qualifies with, for example, if she was not a kohen, if she had a relationship with someone that's also, she's also to marry a kohen, and if she was a bas kohen, she can no longer eat truma. Says the Gemara, the following thing Rav Sheish told us that he knew like and he illuminated our eyes from our Mishnah we learned right here. It says in our Mishnah, this is what he says. That's an interesting halacha. We know that a zoyna is not allowed to marry a kohen, and we know that a woman who was married to a kohen, if she was raped, she can no longer live with her husband. It's a special did by a kohen, even though it's totally a coercion. Make a bigger chiddush. He says if she was married to Yisrael and she was raped, of course she's allowed to continue living with the husband. But if her husband dies and now she's an almana, widow, she's allowed to marry a kohen, she can't. Because now she has the status of a zoyna, and even though she committed to live with the husband of Yisrael, but she can no longer live with a kohen, even though it happened while she was married to a Yisrael. Even though she's committed to her husband, she is possible to a kohen. Why is she possible to a kohen? Either because she's falls under the category of a zoyna, or we'll soon see another category, and therefore she can no longer live with a kohen in the future. The Tanatun and the Raif Mamol Mishnah. What's the Raif Mamol Mishnah? It says it says so too. If anyone has a relationship with any of that royas in the Torah, like incest, oipsulus, or anyone that's disqualified to kohuna, what that disqualifies it to marrying a kohen who going to Truma. So we see from in what. Now let's understand. What do we mean the so too? What are we trying to learn now? And we're saying the same thing applies to our royas. My love, loishna b'shagig, loishna b'mezid. It doesn't make a difference shagig mezid. Loishna b'oinus, loishna b'rotzen. Uktani, and it says psula apostle to a kohen. That means even though right now she's married to Yisrael, but in the future she can no longer be the kohen if she was coerced. So therefore, it's talking about all these cases, and it says if you had any relation with any of that royas, she's possible to kahuna, and one of that royas, of course, is a married woman, so she's possible to could even though she was forced. Says Gemara, like my v'chein, you know what v'chein means? a hara. Nothing to do with Einus and all that. Maybe the Sheshes is wrong. Maybe if she's married to Yisrael and she was raped, she's not a Zayn at all, because in other words, the Torah is saying since she did it, it happened while she was Bas Yisrael, she's not considered a Zayn at all. Not the pshat that she's a Zayn, but Yisrael's allowed to marry a Zayn. She's not a Zayn. So what does the Mishnah say? B'chein? B'chein is referring to hara. That hara, that the beginning of penetration is also considered us. Says the Gemara, hara dema. Says the Gemara, what happened? What case are we talking about? Ilema that roy is that we're trying to say that roy is the same thing like Yevamos. That what? That hara is enough to make us. It doesn't make sense. Where do we learn that by Yevamos? Yevamos is a lot. Where do we learn that by Yevamos? We learn from Arayis that hara, because clearly by Arayis. So therefore, you're telling me that the chain by Arayis can we learn from Yevamos? It's all the way around. Yevamos we learn from Arayis that even beginning of penetration is us. Or by Yevamos you're kind of remember that Arayis of Yevamos. On the contrary, Yevamos you're from Arayis. Dika rob Arayis. It's by Arayis. Elamai b'chein, I should like it darka to tell you that even if it was the unconventional way of intimacy, it's also by Arayis. Again, the Gemara, and we learned that after Yevamos. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Where do we learn that like darka, that unconventional way is also different from this mishka isha, whichever way they conventional or unconventional. So again, where is that written by Arayis? You're not learning Arayis from Yevamos, you're learning Yevamos from Arayis. So what does it mean? When it comes to chayav lavin, let's say a grusha to a koyin, where over there it doesn't say mishka isha. Therefore, we learn out from Yevamos that what that it's considered an aveda as well, and has nothing to do with the din of Rav Sheshes. And it could be then there's an argument in the Shainim whether that Taka the Gemara argues with Rav Sheshes. In fact, the next question is what Rabbah says now. Whether Rabbah is going to argue, as we're going to see in a minute. Is Rav Sheshes unanimous? Just we have a proof of the Mishnah, or is it actually an argument? Because Rabbah said, Eishes koyin shenensa, the wife of a koyin that was raped, baila loika lem, which was the wife of a koyin that was raped, her husband will get lashes if he continues living with her because she's considered a zayna. Considered a zayna. And what's a zayna? A zayna is someone who commits adultery. Now, obviously she was coerced in it, but by a bas koyin, a coercion is considered a zayna as well, and therefore it's awesome. Mashen Kain, it says about healing. It says in the pasuk, he loinit fasa. She was not forced, and but if she was forced, it's not her fault. And it says he only in this case it's not a fault, but by Bas Kohen it's still a fault. So it could be what Rabbi is saying here is that she's when it comes to Bas Yisrael, she's not a zayin at all. In other words, arguing with Rav Sheshes. That says that if she was a Bas Yisrael, married to Yisrael, even though she's permitted to live, she's a zayin, and therefore in the future can't live with the Kohen. Anyway, Abba Aisha's Kohen should answer by like he gets him out because the zayin mishum zayin is saying mishum zayin mishum tuma loy, but not because of tuma. We learned before that it says by a saita asher says asher hu tama to tell you that a woman a saita that became tamei, that her husband has no right to live with her, and you're not telling me that that's included. Was he right? I'm after zayin. There's two of these. You're lashing because of zayin and lashing because of tamei. Most of the question. It says in the pasuk, "V'hila nitfasa." She wasn't forced. Asura she's been. Is mashma nitfasa. She would have been forced. Mutera. She's permitted to her husband Yisrael. And then how it says he only she. That means it's another case. I've been Yisrael even if she's forced. Asura is also. He who is also if she was forced into having relations. The H is kohen, the wife of a kohen. Now all it says in the pasuk he nitfasa, but it says in the pasuk she was not forced. So it's an asay. The lab habom miklal asay. We have a rule that any lab that is born out of an asay is merely an asay. So why in the world is it getting lashes? Why are you getting lashes for zayna? Omara hakol hoya b'chlal zayna. Every single person, if they had relations while they're married, is considered a zayna. I don't care if it's forced or I don't care if it's done willingly. It says about koyin zayna leikach. They're all zaynas. Navas. However, so then Teddy came along and said, "Look, I exclude by a wife of Israel that she should not be considered a zayin. He learned it first asuda if she wasn't forced. She was also hadid first with that. I'm clearly saying, but if she was forced, she is takamut miklal. The H's coin is only applies to Bas Yisrael. H is Yisrael. What about an H's coin? It does not fall under that exception. So she remains the same Zaina. So the Isa is not from the pasuk. The Torah is just telling you that it goes back to the Isa of a Zaina not married. It's only an exception for Eishes Yisrael, and therefore it's the Isra of a Zaina. Yes, and going further, the Ikadami, others say, others say that Rabba said, Eishes going to answer by the Lekula, you get Malkus Shutuma Kutuma, says the Mother Shutuma, Im Shuzayla, not about Zaina. Alma Ba'ainis, like Zaina is clear. In the second version, that she tak is not a Zaina, she's still Tame, but she's not a Zaina. So only gets one malchus. Most of it, say there's a question. It says the possible he need fast suda. She wasn't forced. She's also honey fast. Whatever. If she's forced, she's mutter. The yesh l'chached. You have another example. She afa pishin it fast. Even though she was forced, asuda is also the age is kind. The lava b'makal say l'chayda should only be in say. You should get malchus. Amar Rabbi said. They were all included. You're right. There's no zaina, but you get malchus for tuma. Even tuma, you ask the question. It's a lava b'makal say. You say no. Everyone was included in the pasuk where it says that the husband should not. It says there that if a person divorces his wife and she marries somebody else, he should not take her back. After she became tama, she should lose another person. So then we say then later on when it says by Yisrael that she wasn't for or she was cursed, but if she was first, muteres, but an H's koyin is not for does not go under that exception. Therefore, she comes under the asher hu tamba, and therefore get a kaim, which is a lav, which says la yuchel by lo rishon, there's a lav, and she gets her lashes. Says the Mishnah. We learned the previous Mishnah about these women if they lived in that right, they lived in sin, and they're disqualified from marrying a kohen in the future. So almana here we have an interesting case. What happens? The kohen she got engaged to someone that's also to her. That if she would have married, would be disqualified from marrying a kohen. If she was done an aveda like incest, she can no longer marry a kohen. She's a zaina. But what happened? She only got engaged. So she was waiting to do an Aveda, but no Aveda actually happened. So here we have an interesting machlekes. Says the Mishnah, Amon, and not only is she disqualified from marrying a kohen, if she's a bas kohen, she can no longer eat truma. So what happens? Almana, the kohen gadol, which is forbidden, and gerusha v'chalug or a divorcee or a chalug head, which is forbidden. All they did was they got engaged. So the moment she got engaged to this person that's also, she can no longer eat truma, and if she's a bas kohen, she can no longer eat truma. Okay, but what happens? Sorry, you can no longer eat truma, even though they didn't. He wasn't mechal her yet, because you only mechal her when you have relations. There were no relations, but because she's lying and waiting to do an aveda, she's no longer eat truma. They say that she's kosher as long as they didn't have any relationship. Is kosher. She does not become a chalola, and therefore she can marry Kohen later on, as we will see, and therefore also she can still eat truma. But what about this anmulu and this garshim and hanasuyin? Let's say she lived with a person which is forbidden, then she became a widow, divorced. Then psulis, then she could no longer eat truma, nor could she ever marry a Kohen, even though let's say her husband died. But mina edis in shadis, according to everybody, if the husband is no longer around, while she was engaged to the husband, she according to Meir cannot eat truma. But if the husband died, then even according to Meir, he never disqualified her, so she can go back and eat truma and maybe marry Kohen as well. So we learned. Meir said, "I have a kavachayim to support myself that she should not eat truma." Let's say the way Rashi has two pshatim to learn the second pshat Rashi, which he likes better. Ma'adar kedusha reshus if a Yisrael marries a bas Yisrael, a ma'achilin she cannot eat truma, obviously because he's not a kohen, he cannot give it to truma yet. Kedusha aveda, you know, eat truma. So l'chayda kedusha aveda. If let's say it's in sin, Taki the kohen, but he's living in sin, then surely is like koshkein, that he cannot give her truma to eat. No difference. This Yisrael cannot feed any woman. Forget about this woman. Any woman can't give truma because he's Yisrael. But this kohen is marrying a woman that he shouldn't be marrying. But if he would have married somebody else, he could give it truma. Because he could give someone else truma. He's only engaged to her, he can give it truma as well. Made another comment. He said, what about somebody who is a psuadaka, for example, that he's not capable of bearing any children. He had crushed or smashed testicles, and the din is in Allah come to Kal Hashem. Up to Daka Koyin Shikiddish Barzal, he happened to be a Koyin and he was a Makadish. He didn't get married, he just got engaged. The Chayli be the same Achlekes, Balamachil, made Rabbi Lazar. And but Shimon, but Meya that said Mishtamel be B'sul Deraisa Leach. I made a hold that since you're engaged to this person, even though you didn't disqualify yet, because you're waiting to Navei Lisa Tadi no longer ready to the same thing here. But I'm Leach. And Rabbi Lazar Shimon, I'm Mishtamel be B'sul Deraisa Achla. And according to Shimon, they say that what? That if you're waiting to do an Aveda, as long as right now you're only engaged, you can go ahead and eat Truma. There's an Ami Achla, you can eat by Psuadaka as well. That's what the Gemara wants to say. It says the Gemara, you cannot compare Psuadaka to the cases that we're talking about. Let's say a Grusha. Let's say a Grusha Gon Hedge. And why is that? Dilma Ad can like Rabbi Lazar Rav Shimon. Ad can like Rabbi Shimon Hassam. You know what? You can eat Truma if you're only engaged. This kohen can give married any other woman. He could give them, provide them with truma. So therefore, you can provide these women that are also to him truma as well. She's a zayna, whatever, you can eat truma as long as you're not married yet. Psuadaka can never marry anyone with Kal Hashem. Cannot provide any truma, even though he's a kohen. So therefore, there would be moida that you cannot, they cannot give her truma. It's like. You can argue no. Psuadaka can marry a gay because you cannot marry him from the coal, but a gay is not a coal, and he can give them truma. So therefore, he could give someone else truma. So maybe he should be able to provide for his wife, even though she's beisa, as long as they're only engaged. No, but Rabbi Yechon asked this very question of Aisha whether a Psuadaka is allowed to marry a gayadis, and give her truma, and didn't answer her. So Idmo, we have two answers. Abai, you have Rava. Abaye comes along and says, what happens? They got married properly and he became Psuadaka after they got married, and since then they had no relations. Since she started eating truma already properly, she can continue eating truma. So there's a case where the Psuadaka can give truma. Therefore, Rav Shimon Lazar holds also, even though the kohen is engaged in this woman in sin, he can give her truma. Rava says, comes along and Rabban says, I'll give you another reason. Because the master has slaves, he's allowed to give them truma. So even though the master might be Psuadaka, he can give truma to his slaves. He can give truma to his slaves, he can give to this woman as well who's engaged to, even though she's a sin. He says simply, kinyan the issues, kinyan the issues. We need to find a similar in marriage, not in master slave relationships. So we have to find another case of marriage where this particular Psuadaka can provide truma. And we said a case where they were married properly, and then afterwards they became a Psuadaka. As long as they have no relationship, she can continue truma. Don't bring in up for him here. And Rabbi because he says, "Shiny there is different because she started eating already properly before, therefore she can continue. But we're talking about you're getting engaged to a woman from the beginning. Who said you can give her truma? He's not worried about the fact that she could eat because he says so every Jew, every Bas Yisrael who married a kohen she continue eating because she started correctly. And Rabba comes along and says, Hasam Poka Kinyana. Rabba says that's different. You know why that's different? Because over there, the kinyan is no longer. When the husband died, when the husband died, the kinyan is no longer there, and because the husband of kohen was the only reason why she's eating. The husband's dead. The kedusha is gone. But over here, the Psuadaka is still alive. The kinyan never disappeared. Very difficult to understand this Gemara because Abaye, just in the previous page, which you learned just half an hour ago, Abaye is the one who said this svara that if the kohen died, she can no longer eat because Paka Kedusha Mineh. And he was talking about that the son died, she can no longer eat because of Paka Kedusha. And now here, Abaye says, let's use that as the kohen died, and she can no longer eat it. And Rabbi Kohen said, yeah, but the reason is because Paka Kedusha Mineh. Abaye knew that. So what was he thinking? Difficult to understand. Anyway, we'll stop over here and continue tomorrow in Mitzvah.